Hello, and welcome back to Mental Music. Welcome to episode 3. I'm so glad you're back. It's been really great to see some responses from you listeners, and to see you listening from loads of different places on Spotify. So welcome to whoever you're listening from. Today I bring you a wonderful guest who I've come to know over the past year and a half, who's been starting what I think is a great little community for just highlighting a lot of underrepresented performers, but particularly composers. And I've brought him here to chat about that and about his work and his experiences today. So I welcome you, Zygmund De Somogyi. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks. I'm really flattered, actually. You've really kind of like highlighted exactly kind of like what I'm trying to achieve. I don't think I'm nearly there yet, the way that you make it out to be, but thank you. It really means a lot.
Why do you not feel you're there yet? Because I feel like when we're creating projects such as me with this podcast and you with your things, I feel like the process is like still really important as part of it as well. So I definitely think you're like doing it. Like I don't.
Well, the process is ongoing, and it's as with everything, the process is always ongoing. I think if you ever feel like you've reached quote unquote there too early on, that's very detrimental to the work you're doing.
Yeah.
No. You should always be kind of looking forward, in a sense.
No, absolutely. So, yeah. So I was really glad that you kind of reached out to me when first highlighted the podcast, because I think just creating communities of instead of echo chambers is such an important thing. But you've created Preludes, which is the right way of saying it, even though it's got an X in it. But could you just briefly talk about just the premise of Preludes and why you've created it?
Of course, Max. Thanks. So Preludes, to me, I started it in the first lockdown. So it was about a month into COVID. I was living by myself in a house, like really not speaking to anyone, feeling very disconnected from not just society at large, but from like kind of the community of composers that I'd grown to know, having started in Birmingham in September. And it started kind of as a way for me to kind of continue my relationship with communities and new music. That's kind of how I originally envisioned it, and as kind of almost a continuation of my education in terms of learning the writing processes and perspectives of different practitioners of not just new music, but kind of all kind of creative arts in a sense. Like over the course of this the 8-9 months I've been doing Preludes, I've had a whole bunch of people on board. I've had a lot of composers. I've had a few singer-songwriters, performance artists. I even had a poet, an author on as well, which was absolutely brilliant. And so for me, it's kind of a way to kind of get not just familiar, but kind of help cultivate this community of artists and creatives that aren't necessarily fit into a certain box. And on top of that, also kind of provide a haven outside of the kind of academic bubble for a lot of contemporary composers, a lot of people who partake in contemporary classical music that isn't necessarily accessible in the wider world yet. I think that's something that will change soon, but that's kind of the general gist of what Preludes is about.
It's a great general gist, and I think the thing that really attracts me to it, that we've talked about a bit before, and I certainly feel is this idea of, particularly with classical performers and classical contemporary composers at the moment, there is that kind of space to fit in, but it's very academic, and in the sense that, you know, this is the way, this is the highway, you must do it like this. And then you get left with these kind of quite insular, inward-looking bubbles of it, and it's nice for a time, but it's, as I say, it's an echo chamber, right? And it's, you only get so far with that. So what I really loved it for the fact that you're just kind of like, it's helping people actually advertise themselves, I suppose, and just get more viewpoints out there.
Thanks. Yeah, that's something that I've really tried to kind of put a focus on, is kind of giving voices to a lot of people who, especially those who kind of have been kind of creating and performing in these like so-called bubbles, to kind of like help them break out of it a little bit and help them kind of, or help them find new audiences in a sense. That's always something that I found important. And also on the kind of other side of things, there's a lot of artists that I've been in touch with from the kind of DIY indie alternative communities that I used to frequent when I was younger.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, they have just as much legitimacy as people who kind of went to a conservatoire or kind of had a more of an academic background. And for me, I think it's so important that these kind of boundaries and these divisions between what's so-called classical and what isn't get broken down, and kind of the middleman that is the kind of like academic establishment, classical canon, like needs to be kind of not delegitimized, but the canon needs to be a lot more open and a lot less exclusive.
Absolutely has to be much more exclusive. I really like how you put that. Yeah, just that. But I definitely feel like that's kind of something, though not identically in common, that we have, but certainly I think that we share to a degree, is kind of a bit of a more of a non-stereotypical entrance into kind of higher education in terms of music and such. And it sounds to me very much that, you know, you're creating this as a kind of, I don't want to say it's like a real response to what you lacked, but like in some ways that's what we tend to create as people who create these kind of spaces. It's making something so that the people who come after us have something that we didn't have, so that it gets better like once we left it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I understand 100% what you mean. I think it's one of the reasons that I did start Preludes is because I kind of discovered the world of new music quite late on, I guess, in comparison to a lot of other composers at conservatoires. And when I was younger, I felt quite kind of disillusioned by the state of contemporary music, to the point where I didn't necessarily like leave it behind, but I found kind of a home for myself in different music circles and different music communities, ones which I felt were more inclusive and were more open-minded.
Yeah.
But
well, if you could, like, feel free to. No, it's fine. Well, feel free to. I was going to ask, what has been your kind of background before we met, which was like last year in Birmingham. Like, how did you come to being there?
Well, so I did my undergrad at Leeds University, but I didn't really have a proper focus on composition whilst I was there. I did a bit of electroacoustic composition, but my influences were less kind of on the kind of like contemporary classical side, and more kind of what was happening in like some of the harsh noise and like industrial circles. And whilst I was at Leeds, I also formed a punk band called High Visions. We're still going. We've released our third EP back in June, and hopefully, I guess once things get a bit better, we'll hopefully be able to start touring again, which would be amazing.
That would be the dream, wouldn't it?
It really would, yeah. But where was I? Yeah, so I kind of had these like different facets of what I was doing, and I kind of also threw myself into kind of going to a lot of local shows in Leeds. At the time, Leeds had a very thriving DIY community, with venues such as Chunk, which is gone now, which is really sad, Wharf Chambers, Brudenell Social Club to an extent. Like there are some amazing venues in Leeds. Santiago's as well. That's a venue we played a lot. And there seemed to be a real kind of focus on kind of not necessarily just bands that didn't fit the bill, but just kind of bands from loads of different kinds of backgrounds. It seemed very inclusive and very like you kind of felt at home there, no matter kind of what your background was, at least for me. And that's something that was really kind of formative, I think, for me. Because after I left Leeds, I tried to get a job. I absolutely failed at that. I ended up having to move back to my parents' house in London. And yeah, I ended up working in like a bunch of different things. Like I ended up working at a catering company, which was awful. I ended up working in a pub for about like 6-7 months or so, which was fun, but like I think I just needed something a bit more substantial. And so I just thought, well, why not just apply for a composition degree? Because I like composing. I mean, I knew very little at the time because it wasn't really my background. I didn't really know much about contemporary music, but I kind of applied to a couple conservatoires on a whim. I got rejected from the Royal College, as per. I think that's a rite of passage for everyone. And then Birmingham accepted me, and I just thought, well, you know, why not? And to be honest, it was the best decision I've ever made in my life. Yeah.
What was it about Birmingham that really kind of attracted you to it? Because I think one thing that really stood out from the conversations that we've had before is you very blatantly said to me, well, I didn't really know much about notation before I came here, which to me even really kind of challenged my perceptions of people who go into composition. It's like, that's very interesting. So what was it about kind of Birmingham that really attracted you into it? And I suppose one question I really have also is like, what was your interview like? Because interviews can be like game changers for whether you're interested in places.
I think, to be honest, the interview kind of was a bit of a game changer for me. I think I spoke to both Andrew and Joe. I think I spoke to Joe briefly. I think Andrew interviewed me. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. But I remember I didn't even submit, I think, a proper score. I don't remember. No, I did submit a score, but they didn't look at it. They looked at a couple conceptual kind of pieces that I had, and then they looked at my electroacoustic stuff, like in the interview. And they had such kind of like a non-traditional kind of, not worldview, but like it just felt a lot more open in comparison to some other interviews I had where like they basically said that my portfolio sucked. But then I remember I got another offer somewhere else purely because I did an exam and I knew who like all the composers they played me were. And I think Birmingham stood out because they didn't care so much for how much knowledge I had. And to be honest, when I came to Birmingham, I felt so out of my depth. Like I had no idea what to expect. I still remember in my freshers, like I was just kind of like talking to a lot of people, and I was like, and they were like, "Oh, what kind of pieces do you?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't even know how to notate." So yeah, it was a massive step up, I think, coming to Birmingham, but it was a step up that I needed.
Oh yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. To a certain degree, a kind of a challenge can really just push you to do anything, I suppose. Like I've had particular bits recently of things that have happened in my life where it's like, oh, that's actually a real big push to actually get healthy again physically, not just mentally, but it's like, okay, now it's time to run, and I am doing that now. But it's you sometimes need those kind of pushes, and I think, but it does, yeah. I think also, yeah, it does end up coming with that kind of imposter syndrome almost, I suppose.
100%. That is something that I've definitely experienced.
Yeah. So. Well, you and me too, brother. It's, yeah, I think, because for me, in terms of background, one of the things that really kind of made me feel like, oh, I've come from a completely different world with this is I'd never heard of music services before, and like I didn't really have like junior departments that I'd been to, because my school time was very much in a bubble of itself. So coming to hear people being like, oh, knowing this repertoire and this stuff and these concertos, not even just in like a sax department thing, but just as general woodwind. It was I can very much remember, and I still feel a little bit today of just like, I'm not sure I belong. but it's that pursuance thing that's the most important, I certainly think, of just being like, I mean, that's the system. This is what I do and what I do best. And I suppose a little bit egotistically, the world can bend around me. You know, it's
kind of see.
Yeah, no, it's that. I think it's that kind of Captain America thing of saying, no, you move.
Yeah, I understand. It's something that I definitely kind of felt like when I first came to Birmingham. I think I definitely felt like I didn't fit in. I definitely felt like I was the one that didn't come from the right background or whatever, and I was the one playing catch up for the first 6 months. Yeah. And then COVID happens, and now I suddenly don't feel like I'm playing catch up.
Yeah, because I suppose that's a. I mean, it's not a unique thing, I suppose, because so many people are going through it, but it's a unique experience for someone for a fair few people in position of being like a global pandemic has like is majoritatively affecting a postgraduate degree. Like 2 years, like this is taking up most of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm starting to feel like that because obviously this started last year, so this took like a huge chunk out of my third year, and it's still going into fourth. So it's, I suppose, a little bit of the similar thing being, well, this is taking away from time of like the main bits of marked work for my degree, but I suppose that's how's that kind of made you feel having this kind of it's almost a big blanket over it, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, it's weird, like having to kind of accept that the majority of your professional experience going into composition is going to be taken up by almost purely online work in the middle of a pandemic. Like it does feel like sometimes, like, you know, you're not making the right professional connections, or you're starting your career at an inherent disadvantage. And that's something that myself and a lot of my course mates have been talking about, like how we feel like, I mean, we don't know how this is going to pan out, obviously, because none of us can see into the future, but it's like there's always that nagging feeling like, hang on, like, if COVID hadn't happened, maybe I'd be able to meet someone who'd be interested in commissioning me, or maybe I'd be able to do this, and this, or meet the right people to do this, or when in reality you're just doing it all online now. And so I think a lot of people are losing motivation. To be honest, I think a lot of people are struggling a lot more than I am, to be honest. Like I feel like I'm very much a kind of just, this sucks, but I'm just going to grit my teeth and get on with it type of thing, because it's either that or nothing.
Well, yeah, I mean I think that's certainly valid, and I mean, I know there'll definitely be people who can relate to that, of kind of being like, some people have it worse than I, but I think it's still important to, you know, realise that I heard a bit of the helicopter. It's fine. We'll keep that in.
Okay.
But I think it's still important to realise, you know, it's still affecting you. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've certainly heard from articles and people speaking on the news, which I normally find is just stressful anyways.
I've stopped watching the news. Just saying.
BBC News can go enter expletive itself. But I think one of the main things is realizing that, it's okay that like this period of time is making you feel like bad about yourself, because that's what like a massive traumatic like global event will do. It's then just it's an extra blow that it's just really hitting our kind of, I don't even want to call it a sector of work, but our life passions are being affected at one of the hardest. So I commend you felt like absolutely gritting your teeth for it. I wish I could be as like absolute with it, but it absolutely is a frustration.
It is frustrating. Like, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly frustrating. Like, I think the only work that I've had premiered since summer has been like a thing with the percussion department, but I've written loads of other pieces in like the past few months for my portfolio, and I don't know whether I can use any of them because I don't know whether we'll be able to get them recorded before the deadline.
Well, that's the thing. I was supposed to be playing in a couple of your pieces, wasn't I? Yeah, it was one of those things I was really looking forward to. It was a massive thing for like sax ensemble and like 7 like percussionists or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was crazy big. Like, I think it was like nearly 18 people.
Oh, that would have been so good, Ziggy.
I know. I know they want to make it happen. I don't know exactly when. They did say that if it does need to get pushed back to like next academic year, they're still going to do it, and I'm still going to be like at the premiere and
that'd be great. I mean,
yeah.
Good luck to whoever is playing in that, because I won't be.
Well, they better bring you back for it, because.
Well, it depends if I can. It depends. I mean, I can talk to you later about what I've hopefully got coming up, but like it could be like I might not be able to.
Yeah.
But I mean, I hope it does happen, and I think that's certainly one of the things that makes me a little glad in this time, that they're at least hopeful that they can try and bring these things back through today.
Like, I don't want to. I'm not like an eternal pessimist or anything. Like, even in the worst case scenario, it's not like we're going to be in lockdowns the rest of our lives, So
absolutely.
Like, things are going to start going back to normal at some point. So I don't see reason to kind of, at least for me, I don't see reason to kind of like bog myself down with like kind of my own self-pity. I don't know. I just, maybe it's something I'm just forcefully repressing. I don't know. But I think it's a coping mechanism, like a kind of, well, this is how it is. You can't control it. Therefore, there's no point worrying about it, because there's literally nothing you can do.
Well, I think it's a bit more than just it's a bit more in the sense that it's a bit better than a coping mechanism, I think that's a relatively healthy way to look at it. This is something that's humongous, far bigger than our tiny selves. What we can't change, but what we can is our way of thinking of it. And
if you ever read Marcus Aurelius, from crisis comes opportunity.
Indeed.
Which is how I've survived and stayed sane during all this.
Yeah.
Like, to be honest, Preludes never would have happened if it wasn't for COVID. I think I'd be kind of neck deep in all of my composition work, because I think Preludes was one of those things that kind of filled the void of like, I've got a lot of free time. What should I do? And that's free time that would usually be spent like going to the pub or working at a pub, or like.
Yeah, it's a different use of your time, and no, absolutely, it's valid. But that actually kind of brings me on to the thing that I did want to ask you, because another thing that you've been kind of dealing with as well, because of Oh, so much drama is kind of these. Well, kind of firsthand. I think you've been one of the people who I know is dealing with this most. Is kind of these aftermaths of Brexit.
The B word.
The B word.
The B
I
word.
said it.
Yeah, it's.
It was going to come up. I'm sorry, Ziggy.
I know. Yeah. So go on.
No, I was. Yeah, because I think it kind of. Again, it's one of those things where I don't think we identically can relate to it because I'm still in the country, but I wanted to ask, like, as someone who's like away from that Birmingham bubble again, and who's away from that bubble whilst being in a composer's bubble, which is already quite small, how that kind of feels.
Well, I personally just see it as like if I was in Birmingham, I would be in the exact same bubbles in the exact same way as I am right now, except my girlfriend wouldn't be there, and I'd be lonely. Like there's like no one's able to work normally at the moment, so the best we can do is put ourselves in an environment that'll help us survive the absolute best we can. And for me, that environment is wherever my girlfriend is, to be honest.
It's with your significant other, and that's a wonderful answer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to be honest, like it for me, like during all this, it wouldn't really matter where we lived, but if we were together, like it's just makes it that bit easier to cope.
Oh. No, that's.
I feel sorry for my housemates. I abandoned them in their hour of need, but you know.
Well, you've got to put yourself first. Oh. I suppose that does kind of bring me on to my next kind of questions for you, because one area that I am kind of glad I do have you and certainly other composer friends, as is it gives me a real insight into what it is like to be a studying composer. I literally remember back to last year, no, not last year, year before, in like October, and it was you and like it felt like a dozen composers and then me in a room drinking. I was like, this is unique. But one of the things you talked to me about before, and I've certainly spoken to other composers about, is kind of a kind of slight alienation of how it feels to be a composer. And I wondered even when the world is like closer to like the normal that it should be, insert quotation marks, you know, I certainly hear those things of a composer's piece being put towards like a concert at conservatoire or something, or to a platform, and a bit of nonchalantness to it. And I certainly see that as kind of upsetting. And I wonder how much, like, even with like the amazing tutors that we have at Birmingham, people like Joe Cutler, and people like Michael Walters and Andy Ingemels, Andrew Hamilton, you know, still feel yeah, like it still feels a bit like you guys are still kind of in your own way a little bit, like not in your own way, but like in your own little world to it.
I think there's an inherent kind of lack of communication. I don't know if this is just a Birmingham thing or if this happened to all conservatoires. I don't know. But I think there's an inherent lack of communication between composition and performance departments a lot of the time, when really I think that people should be working in tandem a lot more. Like whenever I've got a piece that I write for performers, I like to get in touch with the performers before I finish the piece to kind of like help tailor it to them a bit more. And I think that's a kind of attitude that really needs to be kind of perpetuated a lot more. And I think that this is the fault of kind of everyone. I think this isn't one particular area's fault. I just think that people need to talk more and people need to collaborate more, because essentially, like, the old adage of the composer being like the dictator and the performers kind of, you know, like playing their work, that's slowly dying, that's slowly fading away. Really, composers and performers, I see it more as like we're working together on the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think some of the best kind of large ensemble and orchestral stuff that I've done in my time so far. I don't want to say it in my time as if it's already over. I'm nearly 23, not 83. But it's been where, you know, composers have been right up there with them or with us, and, you know, talking things through. Like, I think and really getting alongside a conductor and be like, oh, maybe go into this a little more, or lean into this, and obviously have it a bit vice versa, listening to, because I think you can only learn so much by writing stuff down. You have to actually hear things like live. I think that's you're nodding your head as a rather big yes, that's absolutely true.
That is 100% true.
But yeah, it's definitely lacking a bit, and I think you're right. It's not just one kind of side's fault, because I think either side to it could be very much they're too much in the way of new music, or they're not respecting the traditions, and I don't know whether that takes someone in the middle saying you're arguing like completely different ends of the spectrum. There's a centre ground to it, or if people actually have to come listen in the first place.
Yeah. It's difficult to think about, really, sometimes, but I think it's just something that needs to be worked on kind of on a long-term basis. And I mean, I'm guilty of this as well. Like, I don't really reach out to many of the performance departments in the same way that, like, a lot of the performance departments don't really necessarily reach out to us. So I think really if there was just more communication, like, most of these problems would be ironed out. It's not that there's an inherent difference, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Weirdly, I feel like we can kind of wrap her up around now.
I mean, what time is it? Oh, well, we've been going for around 30 minutes or so, so yeah.
Oh. Well, well, I think with some of these things, you know, they take a bit of they take just a bit of a naturality to feel where they end up. And to be honest, that's been really interesting talking to you about those things, Ziggy. And yeah, no, it's just generally interesting. As I've said to you before and previous guests, you know, this is quite a natural thing, so we'll go on for as long as we want to. And if you want to come back and talk about more stuff, you're welcome to.
Thanks.
But yeah, it's been wonderful speaking to you on this episode.
Thank you.
As one of the wonderful things that you suggested, Mental Music will now be going to be working with you on Prelude. So
we'll create a little page for you on the website.
Fantastic. So if anyone is already coming over from Preludes, hello. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
It's no problem at all. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and the links will be down in description boxes and shared about. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. How's the ending music go? Like, that's how it's good.
Right. Bye for now.